basically a project that I started prior to October 7th. I was realizing that liberal Zionism was starting to encroach and be accepted into the space. And this is initially how I started trying to speak out, especially when we're talking about a very dominated white male leftist space. So I just wanted to call that out and slowly move from there, mainly focusing on decolonial subjects and analysis. I do some union organizing. I'm very fortunate to have a union in my workplace. I just want to contribute to that. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Veronica Hernandez. I am a student organizer for today, and representing the committee in solidarity with the people of El Salvador. We've done our best here at Midnight Book, so I'm happy to do another thing with Midnight Book today. A little bit about Speak Fix. It began in 1980 as a solidarity movement, struggling with the people of El Salvador during the Civil War, advocating for U.S. out of El Salvador, no U.S. intervention in our country. And today, Speak Fix has evolved into a group that stands solidarity in general with the popular leftist socialist movement in El Salvador. So, the anti-imperialism, anti-imperialism, and that's a little about Speak Fix. Hello, my name is Amy Cedar, and I'm with Reading Hands-On Cuba. So we're a committee that focuses on ending the blockade on Cuba. As you know, Cuba has, they're under the terrorist list by the U.S., so there's a lot of restrictions on trade with the U.S. and also since the U.S. is so powerful, things that are not really to do free, or at least the economic components with Cuba, so they're struggling a lot financially ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union. So Hands On Cuba is dedicated to conflict ending the blockade against Cuba. And like you mentioned, I just came back in, and I don't know how many delegates, 60 delegates came back from the brigade to end the blockade against Cuba during the 80s. So, if you have more questions, you can let me know after our committees and related. So, we have other community business organizations. Thank you so much. And to start us off, I have the first question. What is Latin America's attitude broadly towards the Caribbean? How does racism and colorism impact this attitude? Okay, for the Caribbean, I'm something else on this. So as a Central American, I can say that the attitude to the Caribbean in general, coming out of Latin America, is very racially motivated. It's very racist. I think there's a lot of push to separate Latino America and the Caribbean with excuses like the language we speak, right? In Latin America, you speak Spanish, except for those who speak Portuguese. But in the Caribbean, you have to understand English, so that's why we're different. But culturally, we're more alike than different. So I feel like those differences are very much just excuses to excuse the discrimination. And I think personally that people very much buy into that division game. When I studied at Howard University, which is a historically black college university, they have Caribbean studies as a minor. But they didn't have Latin American studies as a minor. They thought was kind of like, but there are black people in Latin America too, and that should be studied, that should be talked about at such a related HBCU. But then you go to PWI, like right now, entering a Hispanic survey institution, CSUN, and they have Latin American studies, Chicano studies, and Central American studies, but they don't have Caribbean studies, right? Which is crazy for a Hispanic survey institution that you wouldn't also have Caribbean studies if you're going to go as far as having Chicano and Central American studies. CSUN is the only college in, I think, the United States that has Central American studies. So I think that's a good way of showing you the division that is for. And then I think also in El Salvador specifically, there's this idea that there are no black people in El Salvador. And one of the excuses people use for that is saying that El Salvador doesn't have a Caribbean coast, so there's no way to have black people. Which is why it's so stupid in the first place. And just like before we even get to the racism, it's so historically inaccurate. It's so historically untrue, right? But it shows you what they're thinking, the mindset of that Caribbean equals black, right? And there's also kind of a pride in saying that there are no black people in Salvador that's spreading that myth. So yeah, there is a big division. It is very racially motivated. And I guess the way to why that is. Alright, just a heads up, I didn't know we were minutes ago. But I did take some notes or like some pointers. So Latin American attitude for the Caribbean, I would say a lot of it is anti-black, maybe one black ancestry, slavery, and Caribbean. Yeah, we can see the Cuban Revolution prior to that, there was slavery, and I think the attitude towards that is reflected where a lot of Latin Americans don't consider the Caribbean Latin, Latino because of this. But it's important to note that all these distinctions were made because of colonization. And this is further, this kind of ideology is a further tool used to create that distinction of race and separating the colonized from each other and creating that division. So that's what I
Yeah, I think a large part of it, just echoing what Marie just said, is trying to make that separation between, well, we're not black. You see it in different areas in general, but one of the main kind of pillars to distinguish yourself is to say we're not black. We might be this, we might be that, but we're not black. In order to maintain that kind of some level of hierarchy below them, so they can look down on them. So I think that distinction is purposely made to say, well, we might be showing, we might be economically or technologically, all these things that we might be behind the European or Western powers. At least we're not part of the Caribbean, at least we're not black. I feel like most Latin America in general, like, wants to be mini Argentina. They want to eradicate the indigenous and black populations and have this Eurocentric culture. And in order to do that, they must distance themselves from the Caribbean because the Caribbean is rich. Like anti-slavery revolts, this revolution, has always been part of the Caribbean. And I think a lot of these settler colonial states here, not just white people, but their politics and their revolutionary fervor.
Getting a little more into it, what internal contradictions do you currently face regarding external contradictions faced in the Caribbean regarding colors and racism? I think some of the same contradictions that exist in the Caribbean kind of exist in Latin America, or as I can speak to some of the contradictions Latin American view in regards to the Caribbean. So for one thing I want to mention, going back to the Salvador, El Salvador was the third country in Latin America to abolish slavery. Haiti, of course, and then Chile, and then El Salvador, right? And so an interesting fact that a lot of people don't really know, and a fact that I found like doing research and studying is that because El Salvador was the third country, right, to abolish slavery, a lot of black people, all the Africans, like from the neighboring countries that we know today, to have so much, to have an Afro-Central American population, like Nicaragua, Guatemala, Honduras, Panama, Belize. A lot of people from those countries fled to El Salvador to escape slavery. But that's a history they're not going to teach you, that you're not going to know, right? And to this day, people say, oh, we don't have a history of black people. So that's one contradiction, right? Unknowing history. And then denying blackness without knowing the truth, right? And why not be talking. And I think another contradiction that was mentioned before that I know, that racism doesn't exist in Latin America because we're all mixed, right? We're all a little bit of everything. So there's no way racism can exist. Which is an interesting contradiction because I feel like people use that more recently as like part of a new progressive thing to say. But really that is something that has been said for centuries since the Mestizaje project began. Mestizaje has always been glamorized as some kind of proof of like racial diversity and the mixedness of our nations, while at the same time always maintaining white supremacy. And then I think you have also an emphasis on nationality over race. So that's why you're creating the flag. I feel like a lot of people joke that like a Black Dominican when they come to US is gonna say something, I'm not Black, I'm Dominican, right? And saying that they're equating, you know, and deprioritizing Blackness and Indigenousness over the nation as if, you know, you cannot also be Black and Dominican. To be Dominican, you have to not be Black, right? Which is part of that right-wing mestizaje motivation of the Haram de la Casa, right? It benefits the nation for you to be Dominican, but it doesn't benefit the nation for you to be Black, so you're not Black, right? And also, that mentality, the interior part, like that Black being inferior, of like, no, I don't want to be Black, I'm Dominican. Like, that's so messed up. And then another contradiction, it's not a contradiction, but the one that I think personally irritates me the most of all of these contradictions is that even in El Salvador, the country that wants to so badly be white and a population of people who so badly want to deny their African heritage, the food we eat, the music we dance to, the way we dance to it, even some of our words, even some of the ways we dress, you know, that are considered more cultural, comes from Africa, comes from the indigenous population in this country. But how easily is it co-opted, right? If you go on Spotify, you look at Latin music, they're going to give you reggaeton and salsa and merengue, but it's like, you know, where does that music come from? How has it been co-opted? How do they modify it to try to say that it's actually okay to eat sopa de pata, eat plátanos, and embrace those things as cultural things, as long as it's being portrayed in a whitewashed way. So that's one contradiction that personally irritates me, because it's like someone who's eating plátanos, eating sopa de pata, dancing to salsa, merengue, and cumbia is saying that they are not African in any type of way. Okay, because if you go to Africa, you eat the same food, you're listening to the same music, and you're going to be dancing the same way. So those are some contradictions that I think happen in Latin America, and I think in some ways are very present in the Caribbean. So one contradiction I'm going to focus on is the very thing that colonized the Latin American nations is what is being reproduced in the nation, which is white supremacy. So I can kind of elaborate on Cuba. So even though when we talk about race and colorism in Cuba, we also have to talk about communism, its economic structure. So theoretically, under communism, so material reality does not exist in isolation. So what that means is everything we experience, it doesn't exist by itself, right? So race is on separate gender, feminism, communism, etc. So Marxists or communists, they realize that individuals don't create society, we're shaped by society. And where I'm going with that is that, so even under communism, we still have remnants of white supremacy and racism in Cuba. I'm going specifically with Cuba. We have, there's a cultural revolution in Cuba, but we can't have a revolution without cultural change. So I don't know if this is making sense. I'm so sorry. I don't really know the answer to the questions. I just found out.
You're doing great.
Okay, yeah. So there's no revolution without cultural change. But however, we can change the economic structure, right? But we're still going to have the legacy of colorism, racism, colonialism in these nation states. So, for example, Cuba, 65-year project of trying to address racism and colorism, it's not completely destroyed. And when we were in Cuba, my comrades and I, we were told up front, there's still racism, there's still colorism, because white supremacy is reproduced in the culture, and as much as communism is there to combat it, we still have this legacy that's going on. So racial discrimination, it's not legal, it's protected in the Constitution. I can elaborate on it probably later. But it still exists in the cultural sphere. So discriminate in terms of employment. There are programs to fight against racial discrimination, but again, we still see this cultural type of remnants, which is the contradiction, because the very thing that colonizes people is what they're reproducing, is being reproduced by the nation itself. So again, there's no revolution without cultural change, because the masses, us, we are what reproduce culture. There's this very important quote that I think by Kwame Ture of the Black Panthers. I really like him incorporating capitalism and communism and race, and I think he also does a very good job at doing this. So this quote is, if a white man wants to lynch me, that's his problem, right? If you sought the power to lynch me, that's my problem. Racism is not a question of attitude, it's a question of power. Racism gets its power from capitalism. Thus, if you're anti-racist, whether you know it or not, you must be anti-capitalist. The power for racism, the power for sexism comes from capitalism, not an attitude. So, what this quote, talks about is how you can't not be racist with capitalism, and I think that's another fundamental contradiction of Black American countries is that they're both reproducing white supremacy through capitalism and capitalism. Yeah. So again, white supremacy and capitalism, they don't exist on each other. They're individually linked, and that's the biggest contradiction that I see in these nations.
Yeah, so that kind of reminded me of a quote as well by Fanon, who, when he speaks about Marxism in the colonial sense, he talks about the necessity to widen the range of Marxism in order to address these cultural issues of racism. So socialism, communism, anarchism, whatever it is that you're advocating for, it in itself will not address racism or colorism. So we have to keep that in mind always, because too often we become class reductionists in our analysis, and because of our privilege and benefit, it often means that it leaves out indigenous and Black people. Right now, the comments about Cuba, it just kind of made me think. You see how the Democratic Party is pushing Kamala Harris, and it's all about representation, and you want to see brown and Black faces in high places to make yourself feel better, something you or your children can achieve, or criminal. It kind of does make me start questioning, okay, why is it that we don't see, representation in the way that we see the history of the Caribbean? When we think of Caribbean heroes, Fidel, Che, more than Roweros, Argentina doesn't get wider than that unless you go back to Europe. And they both came from an African family. So what does it mean when the biggest icons are white people in the Caribbean? Right? So, these are things that I ask myself, like, why don't I know enough? Just recently in Venezuela, with these reactionary, crystal fascist mobs, were tearing down statues of indigenous people. Right? And they're chanting crisis. That's another whole ass topic, but just to bring it back to the Caribbean, the contradictions within it, you have to look at the way that they were colonized, right? A lot of them weren't settled colonial projects, they were just almost outposts and markets. So when they enacted the revolutions or the anti-slavery revolts, there was very little white people. They outnumbered them. Right, so you start seeing this kind of embrace of caste system left behind in order for those with more power and influence, to start establishing, new caste system that benefits them. And we kind of see this a little bit too in the way that
some Caribbean will view Black Americans in the country. And it's why they say, I'm not black. Because they don't want to be associated with the racist character of Black Americans that the U.S. Pushes out to the rest of the world. So, and then you see the flip side of that, the ADOS movement, right? I always forget that acronym used because they switched it up a couple times. But essentially it's saying that if you're not a direct descendant of chattel slavery in America, then you're not really black. You're not perceived or seen as black. And we see even Donald Trump pushing this on Kamala Harris. Again, not defending her, not saying anything, but this is how this pollutes like the conversations and solidarity and pushing some form of Pan-African unity amongst Caribbean people throughout the diaspora. I started rounding that again, but
Thank you very much. Our next question, is there any difference between all those?
I don't know you're pushing a hand.
Yes, there is. And I think you could do a very elementary definition, but I think a better way, I think a more helpful way is understanding how the systems are put into practice, how those different things are put into practice. So, history lesson. No, this is probably history a lot of you already know. But so, like, in the United States, right, slavery is abolished in 1865, and the way the United States deals with the slavery, or with the remnants that we have, these huge African populations, this huge white population, is very much by enforcing the separation of these two caste systems, right? Enforcing, doing everything they can to enforce and continue separation. And in Latin American Caribbean, informed by eugenics, right, is a very different kind of way of dealing with slavery and the remnants of slavery. So encouraged by and enforced by larger white power nacimiento, right, in both the cultural and physical sense, right? The whiter you are, the better you are, and the more privilege you're entitled to. And like the compañero was saying, more economic privilege too. It's not just like in the street, people are nicer than you. You're gonna get different jobs, right? The family as a household, the casa of the family is gonna be richer, right? And so there's this push to lighten for an economic purpose. It's not separated. And so in the early 1900s, after the last country, Brazil, has abolished slavery in 1881, the Blanquimento Project, I think a good way of understanding how racism functions, the Blanquimento Project functions, is seeing how this push in the early 1900s Latin America to get European immigrants into Latin American countries across the Caribbean, right? While at the same time restricting indigenous and African people from participating in society. And so, El Salvador, for instance, in the 1930s, for instance, our first dictator, General Maximiliano Hernández, prevented the entry of African immigrants while encouraging European immigration. So he wants immigrants from Germany, from Italy, from all those places, but he doesn't want African immigrants. And that's something, that's a piece of history people useful. So explain whether or no Afro-Salvadorans, which is not true. But a key thing about that is like preventing African immigrants from coming in is not the same as kicking African people out of the country. So that's not what he did, right? But he is preventing African immigrants. And today in El Salvador, our second dictator, Bukele, he does the same thing. In 2023, he put a travel fee, like a travel fee of like $1,000 something, $1,000 and some change dollars, on 57 countries for people entering by plane from mostly African countries and then also India. And then at the same time, though, he is begging people, European and gringo people, to come to El Salvador, right? He is begging, he put out grants recently out for foreign experts to come to work in El Salvador. So he wants white academics, white medics, white engineers to come to El Salvador, while at the same time having that travel fee. And also at the same time, keeping the University of El Salvador closed. As if, there's no way Salvadoran people can be medics, Salvadoran people can be academics, or engineers. When he himself is preventing that from happening by closing the university. But I digress. But that's kind of like the way Blanquimento functions, right? And the way we're still dealing with that today, and the way Latin Latin America has worked so hard, Latin American leaders have worked so hard to widen the nation. And then the Colors Project, I think a good way to explain the way the Colors Project works is looking at the way Mestizaje began and the Mestizaje Project put into place, and specifically how, like Compañera said, that is, it pushed so much and enforced so much with an economic purpose, right? Mestizaje, again, being mestizo, something a lot of people celebrate nowadays. Not that it's like, you can't be proud of people already, but in the sense that, like, as if why Mestizaje is here is for a good reason. But it's really important to understand that the beginnings of Mestizaje was this enforcement of African and indigenous women to be with white men specifically, to lighten the nation, and you see the way that push benefits white supremacy in the very fact that it was only African women and indigenous women who are supposed to be with white men, but not the other way around, right? Because that wouldn't maintain white supremacy, that wouldn't maintain power if the man of the household is very machismo, patriarchal structures was African or indigenous. It wouldn't benefit. It would only benefit if he was white and the women second-class citizens or African and indigenous. And so that kind of shows you, I think, the way the Colors Project is put. And it's important to understand, like, when we never explain how place and race are, class and race are intrinsically tied together, pushed together, right? And that it's not just any group of people. Like here in the United States, you can have black elites like Kamala Harris. But in Latin American Caribbean, it's very much structured so that the peasant class is going to be the darkest class, and that the elites are always going to be the white class. And like, yeah, I think that's really good for the company of how even the revolutionary leaders that we look up to, you know, you could see Fidel Castro and Che Guevara posted all over, not all over, but celebrated by leftists in Latin America. But Toussaint Louverture is not going to have that same, it's not celebrated to that same extent, even though, you know, the legacy of the revolution he led and the Haitian people led was a lot more impactful, or it was the beginning, you know, of that, what would that inspire the Cuban Revolution too. So, and then if you also, you know, with Kusama's here in the United States, you know, the way they talk about, like, my property was taken away, and I'm so mad. It's like, our property was a slave plantation that I was taken away, you know, slave owner property being taken away. And so the unique hatred that they have for, you know, esos pobres que robaron mi tierra, it's not just any pobres, they're indios and negros, right? And so there's a very much, the classism is racially motivated, the racism is class. So I think understanding those systems of mestizaje and blanqueamiento and how they're put into place is a good way of maybe seeing how race and colorism are different, but of course they're connected.
I think going on with that, it's very important to recognize that, I know that, I guess, like, going back to plastic reductionism, I think it's very important to know the legacy of, like, anti-blackness and how it exists on a global scale. You can't deny, but, you know, it doesn't exist anywhere in the world. So, again, yes, I think it explains pretty well the difference between colorism and racism in the caste system. I think to say no, that there is not a difference between the two, would be ahistorical, and I think that's something very important to just take in mind when you're, I guess in general, when you are making an analysis of this current social structure, is to tie back to the history of it, and I really appreciate that you gave a history of the legacy that still exists today, right? Because these that exist today don't exist out of nowhere. There's a creation of it, there's the way that it continues, or shapes and changes. Yeah, and I think it's important to, going back to Cuba, I think the Cuban people, the Constitution actually addresses here the equal rights, and it makes a distinction between race and color. And I think that's something very important to know if we ever want to actually address race and colorism instead of doing it in a more liberal way, I guess, for lack of a better word. You see people talking about race and racism and colorism, but what does that mean? Like people, it doesn't mean having like a cop president. Does it mean, I don't know, having like, I don't know, having, I don't know if that makes sense, but I don't know where I was gonna go with this, but yeah, that's pretty much. I just really appreciate that you going back to the history of it, and it's important to notice that, or to know that we can't separate history, because it still exists among us, our society, and us. We socialize by things that exist in that.
So for me, the distinction between racism and colorism is the success of the psychological warfare of white supremacy. Because what starts happening is that we start self-policing. We don't need white people in the room for us to start, pointing out if who's darker equals threatening, equals potentially more low economic position, all these things. We start self-policing. What is it that you hear when you're growing up? Cúbrete, las cosas más prieto, más like, cover yourself. This is coming from somebody who loves you, right? A parental figure. Because they don't want you to be treated like our white people are treated. So they're trying to prevent and safeguard you from experiencing the oppression, subjugation, racialization, all the words that they know that darker skinned people are facing, instead of actually combating the white supremacist mindset. Why is it that you're telling us, don't get darker, instead of saying, hey, you're beautiful the way that you are, and guess what? People darker than you are also beautiful, right? So that self-policing mechanism, or the psychological warfare of white supremacy, for me, is the distinction between racism and colorism. So that's as far as I would take in that regard. I do want to mention, and this isn't me like bashing on Cuba, this sounds kind of heck, I apologize, that's not the case. Doing a little bit of research prior to this, it was Brazil who, I believe, in the third United Nations Convention about racism, if I'm not mistaken, was trying to push forward a group of black Brazilians trying to push forward policies in order to prevent racism in the country. Years went by, and the individuals that were heading this project said, like, okay, we have the laws in the book, but culturally nothing's changing. So, like, respectfully, that might be in the Cuban Constitution, and similar might be in other constitutions. But again, until you have that cultural revolution, nothing's going to change. And we see it here. Like, if anything, they flip it and they say that you were only hired, you only have the position you have because you're a minority hired. Okay. So even if things are on the books, the laws are in place, people know the laws, if the culture doesn't change around it, normal irrelevant and usually counterproductive in pushing forward black and brown people.
Thank you. The next question: why is the Caribbean often seen as ground zero for imperialist
Because it is. I mean, it literally is. To this day, aid is being made to pay for igniting, especially earlier, revolution and this whole tendency. Literally nothing that we celebrate would have come about without Haitian, without the Haitian revolution. And yes, 100%. Why isn't Haiti, the revolution in Haiti, our main pillar of inspiration and again, ground zero to embrace revolution, to combat white supremacy? That should be it.
And what does it say about us that we don't embrace it as such? Because we know better. We don't have the excuse of, why didn't I know that history? Well, fucking learn it. That's part of our responsibility. Because the fact that we don't, subconsciously, it is anti-blackness. You want heroes that look like you or look like somebody that you've been taught to respect. We all want that. So again, what does it say about us that we're failing to embrace that wholeheartedly? Because then you're like, well, I'm not gonna benefit from my privilege being white. I'm not gonna be in the vanguard of the revolution. That means you have to shut up and actually listen to people who are more oppressive. And that's where accountability comes in, right? But to the question, man, the U.S. hates the Caribbean because they know what a threat they felt. And it's our responsibility to study why there's such a threat and the suffering that they're still going through because of it.
Yes, I agree. Even more history. Sorry, I love history. My mom's a history teacher. So, and I really resonate with the Ghanaian philosophy of Sankofa. Go back and touch it. To go forward, you have to know your past. So, history is my very tiny thing. But yeah, like the compañero said, I think Caribbean is seen as ground zero for imperialist oppression, for the legacy of the impact of the legacy of slavery and the rich legacy of revolution we get from the Caribbean. I think what a lot of people, mostly gringos, don't advise are trying not to be born in the U.S., but mostly people who live in the United States on this side don't understand that everything in the United States related to slavery. Like the company also mentioned earlier, as the Caribbean, the islands were market points, right? So as it was perfected and tried first in the Caribbean and then exported to the other places where we have slavery. Like when the first African people were trafficked, right, and come to the Americas, the first point they hit is the Caribbean, right, where they are seasoned, and then from there traded off to wherever they go. And then the first slave codes that come to define chattel slavery as we know today started in the Caribbean. The English in the early 1660s in Barbados established the first slave codes that will come to define chattel slavery of enslaved African people not being human, but being property, and so therefore their children are property too. That started in the Caribbean. And it did such a good job at maintaining the production and everything, defining chattel slavery that was said implemented throughout the United States and the rest of Latin America. And then also just because I think more Africans were kidnapped and trafficked to the Caribbean and in Latin America than in the United States. Of the 12 million people trafficked, which is a number that they did, a little over half, or about half, were brought to Latin America and the Caribbean. And then in the 17th century, like the woman was saying, the islands officially became the principal point for the slave market. And I think the way you see that today, the Caribbean being the center of all that, is that English, French, and Spanish are spoken throughout the islands and are the official languages of the certain islands, right? And you don't see that in the United States, you don't see that in the rest of Latin America. So it shows you how the Caribbean was essential. And then the rich legacy of revolution we get from the Caribbean, from the Haitian Revolution, and then also from the Cuban Revolution, which would inspire the other Latin American country revolutions, like the Nicaragua Sandinista and Salvador, the FMLN, the parties who would then create the FMLN that comes out of Cuba, and then from Haiti will then inspire the Cuban Revolution, right? So we look to the Caribbean nations as the history of revolution, inspires revolution in Latin America, and that's why they need to be subjugated and they need to be oppressed because of that. To be truly conscious of that history will then lead to revolution throughout Latin America. And like Compañero was explaining earlier, yeah, I think it's impossible to talk about revolution without acknowledging the role race plays in it, because the way the state talks about class and talks about race is specifically about that. You know what I mean? So, for example, I want you to quote in 1881. So this is after slavery is abolished in El Salvador, after it is abolished in the late 1881. The ruling oligarchy of El Salvador, the state census of indigenous and African people, that the existence of the community's landhold impedes agricultural development, obstructs the circulation of wealth, and weakens family bonds and individual independence. Their existence is counter to economic and social principles which the Republic has accepted. And that sentiment has defined Salvadoran policy for Indian African people for the entire history of the country, right in the 1930s on the Panza massacre, and thousands of indigenous people who were carrying out a communist revolt. The intentions of the massacre, you can see how that quote I read earlier lays out the sentiment that would then lead to Panza. And in clarity of the Civil War, that the land theft that continues, that happened then was the reason for the Civil War, and that continues today under Bukele's El Salvador, is informed by capitalist and a racist motivation. So it is not one or the other, but it's both working together. And by not addressing that, we do a failure, right, to the indigenous and African people of these countries by not seeing how class exploitation and racism happen juntos, you know? And that's why they want us to fear Haiti, and they want us to separate ourselves from the Caribbean, just truly to accept those roots and to revere those histories would mean ideally and I believe inevitably that to the empire. That's how the Caribbean is seen as ground zero. And why, like the compañero was saying, it is our responsibility to remember that history, to celebrate that history, and to put it at the forefront and not let it be, you know, afterthought that I think many people can fall into that trap of like, oh yeah, I guess we also have African and indigenous stuff, I guess. No, you do, and that must be the center of your revolutionary mindset. Just to think that. Yeah. No, I feel like we're covering a lot of what I was going to say. So again, so the Caribbean, it's seen as ground zero for imperialist oppression because it is ground zero for imperialist oppression. We see the colonial project. It essentially started there, or that's what, you know, that's where we see it begin. We see all the different techniques that colonizers were trying, and also it is also ground zero for imperialist oppression because of their deep revolutionary roots. And to be, you know, anti-colonial or be anti-imperialist is to be counter-hegemonic to the structure of the U.S. or capitalism or racism. So it's very dangerous, you know, to be anti-imperialist, and we see all these revolutionary roots starting in the Caribbean because of that, and we see all that oppression because of that. So it is essentially, it is a very suppressed area for the Caribbean, facing a lot of oppression because of the challenge that it essentially, you know, presents to the U.S. or these colonial structures. To be revolutionary is to be against the state, the tyrannical state, the U.S. and all these other nations of influence. Yeah. Thank you. Our last question. Perception and reality is liar-skinned wolves are often vulgar in Mexico. Is this and the history of erasure for Black Mexicans one and the same? Is there daylight between colorism and racism? Yes. Yeah, I think. Yeah, Mexico. My expertise is, but I think it's very much the same thing too. European elites are going to be lighter skinned, and that is that is very much intentional. It is very much on purpose. And like I said earlier, it's very much a way to maintain white supremacy in the country through capitalism, and a way to maintain capitalism in the country through white supremacy. And I think the erasure, because I think the erasure of Afro-Mexicans happens in a very similar way to the erasure of Afro-Salvadorans. Like, we like to be like, oh, that's not hard. You know, it's still very much the same thing. And I think it comes from a history of colonialism, which has enforced these caste systems and enforced this project continuing to whiten the nation, and therefore that makes also the nation more wealthy in a way. I don't know if I'm answering this question, but there's one question that I was received earlier. I'm not prepared for it. But is it either between colors and racism? Like what Danielle was saying, I think put it so beautifully when he was like, colorism is that way we self-police ourselves. And I think that personally we need to do that happens in the way of, you know, the political decisions that people are going to make because of that self-policing they have of colorism is going to be benefited, right? They're not able to talk about it that way, they're not conscious of it because of our way we are adopted. And in that way, I think a lot of people get erased. I think that this is probably going a little further from the question, but going back to the idea of how indigenous African people are sort of erased and also co-opted, I think Bukele is like, so in El Salvador, there's a project under the leftist party, under the FMLN, there were projects inspired to revitalize the indigenous language in El Salvador, Nahuatl. And then Bukele comes into power, those projects are kind of ended for a little bit, and then his wife comes out and kind of co-opts those projects. And it's like, oh, we're going to revitalize the law, you know, we're going to do that, but we're also going to inspire students to speak English and to speak Mandarin and to learn French in addition to now, because actually all languages are important. And then those schools become privatized, right, and they're no longer the public, the people who were benefit, most of them, the people who would have spoken Nahuatl had their knowledge on the content and everything, are no longer have access to these schools, right? And I think that's a way of how these movements get co-opted, and a way that brighter faces and richer people can benefit off of this intensification of Afro identities. Hopefully that answers the question better than that. That's what I think I want to hear it. I'm sorry, what is it? I think it's okay. Yeah, so there is, so what we see colorism and racism is that it's all part of the colonial project of colonization. We see colorism, which is unique to other parts of the world, is that it was created by this unique caste system that we talked about earlier. And the reason we do see lighter skinned white people, white Mexicans, who are wealthier is because of this ongoing colonization, the colonial project. You know, colonization was made for the benefit of the colonizer, right? Why is the colonizer going to benefit from this? But as it becomes institutionalized more, we do see a few exceptions. We see a few colonized in high places, but ultimately, since it's institutionalized, we're not going to see, you know, we're going to see the colonizers up there. And I think it's important to note that that's why racism isn't, you know, arbitrary, or it's just not a matter of like feeling a certain way. It's institutionalized, and I think it's important to note that. And with the case of Latin America, colorism and racism, the way it manifests, or colorism and racism manifests because of this caste system created by colonization. Yeah. sense. Yeah.
So it wasn't until 2020 that Black Mexicans were allowed to be counted in the census. It wasn't until 2020 that Black Mexicans weren't allowed to identify as Afro-Mexican. It wasn't until 2020. That's how fucking ridiculous this is. So it's not something to take lightly. It's not something to ignore. It's not something to overlook. It wasn't until 2020. You would think that this would have happened decades ago when in Mexico, no hay racismo, hay clasismo. In Mexico, there is no racism, it's just classism. And that is part of the project of Mestizaje. To lie to you, to say, hey, we're all mixed, la raza cósmica, Nazi ideology, in order for you to dismiss the racism inflicted upon African descendant Mexicans and indigenous people. But we're all a little indigenous, so it's fine. But you go to Mexico and you see who's begging in the streets. You see it. If you're lucky to see any Black Mexicans, if we're being honest. So yeah, it wasn't until 2020. I did want to follow something because, you know, this is a cartoon that maybe someone you grew up with, that you recognize, you meet, I'm pronouncing that right? It's literally a sample character. That's a little kid's cartoon. And the whole fucking country of Mexico defends this cartoon. And what they use as an excuse for that is saying, hey, Looney Tunes created Speedy Gonzalez and Slopo Rodriguez because they're racist and they're mocking us, but we embrace those characters of ourselves. When Looney Tunes tried to pull Speedy Gonzalez from the lineup of cartoons, like Mexicans revolted. Like, that's our guy, what are you doing? Because, you know, credits Mexico, Mexicans in general, self-deprecating, willing to have a good time, don't roast the shit out of them. But they use that as an excuse to continue to embrace this sample character. Saying, well, we can take a joke, you guys can take it as well. Well, it's not up to you whether or not the individuals who you're suppressing should be willing to take a joke. It's the same shit we hear from white people when they start being racist. Oh, it was just a joke, we're just kidding. Why are you so serious about it? Why are you going to cancel me? Right? So it's embedded in the Mexican culture. It's anti-black. So it's not something to take lightly. I don't know if I'm answering the question. But again, 2020, take that with you. It's not history. It's current. It's happening. And we can't ignore it. There's another reality TV show called Mexican Dynasty. It was on Netflix, I believe. Literally Spaniards, who are in nationality Mexican, demonstrating how rich they actually are. And yet we conceptualize Mexico as a poor country. But the richest are always Spanish descent individuals. As mentioned earlier, all of the political figures in power are essentially European in ancestry. That's why everybody was celebrating AMLO. Oh, we got a brown one up there. No. That's how desperate, Latin America in general, and Mexico specifically, is for, brown and black leadership. Because everything else, they're just Europeans in power. That's why there's no separate colonial projects. We can embrace AMLO, we can embrace, left-leaning socialist, quasi-socialist figures, but it's still a separate colonial project, whether it's Mexico or the rest of Latin America. So inherently, they are anti-indigenous and anti-black. And we need to come back.
Thank you, and I think right now we're going to open it up for questions.
on screen.
Oh, right there.
So, what can we do here for the people who are part of the LA County to get more involved in recognizing and acknowledging what's happening in our Latin community, particularly with identifying white people?
I think personally for me, I think one way everyone can start, like we talked about earlier, it's really like a cultural revolution that needs to be happened, right? And so you hear there's a lot of colonies in your mind. But I think that's where it starts of like alright, so I'm Leo, in Los Angeles, I think there, we talk about the Mexican hegemony, that very much exists, right? As a result of just there being a lot of Mexicans here in Los Angeles. But I think also, as an Afro-Latina, I can say that there's also, that mestizo hegemony, right? That Irish-Latino hegemony that exists. And I think one way we can combat that and one way people can do that in their own minds is doing that work to stop self-policing and to, like, first things first, understand the difference between race, ethnicity, and nation, right? I think a lot of people get confused. And it's very easy to be like, oh, we're racially, I'm Latino. And then there's also this question of like, if I'm not racially Latino, then what am I racially, right? And if that Latino's an ethnicity, it's not my race, then what am I racially? Of course, it's our own discussion to do. But I think it starts with there, like understanding that history. And I think I can get frustrated sometimes with the Afro-Latino Center of Academia, because I can feel like, oh my god, we're so stuck on like proving that we exist. We're so stuck on things like the census. But like, oh my god, that is the reality. We're not on censuses. Even in Salvador, I don't think it's the thing where you can put if they're black on the census. So as much as I'm like frustrated about, hey, we're still talking about how to prove that we exist, that's the reality we face, and that's the first step, right? Having to prove that we exist. So I think that's where it starts, at the very, very minimum. And I think another place where it starts for leftists, right, all of us in this room who have already probably achieved that to some extent, right, always that continuous level of work. But I think where our responsibility then comes in is to then bring up those conversations when we talk about things like the Cuban Revolution. Because I can feel like so much of that discussion can just be like, oh, talk about the class struggle. And I'm the first one to be in a room and be like, all the history of the world is the history of class struggle. I'm the first one to be saying that. But it's like, you can ignore that, right? When you look at these peasant classes, that they're all going to be one skin color for the most part, and then you look at these elite classes, and they're all going to be one skin color. So involving race in that conversation and refusing to let it go business and refusing to let people digress it to some identity politics is really important. Because one can't go without the other, and that's when we end up in situations like this with Kamala, I saw her referred to on Twitter earlier. I was like, OMG. Kamala, that's not true. So that's how we end up in this situation, right, with Kamala and people celebrating, like, oh my god, we're gonna get a black woman as president. Like, she's also a cop, and she also literally wants, at this point, basically wants the law to support it. Like, it's scary. But that's how we end up in a situation like this, when we continue to separate these two things and not realize how race and class work in Canada. And that's how we get this situation like in Latin America, where it is really intense and ingrained in the culture, the racism, to the point where it's going to take a lot to unlearn. But I think that's where it starts. Okay, so one thing, thank you for your question. So I think it's very important, sorry, I mean, I know the question, but like, how do you think about it? Okay, how do you think? Okay, I mean, I had the answer, but okay. So, how to combat it, I think it's very important to re-educate ourselves. We change our relationship with the knowledge we have, or the knowledge we have. So again, culture is not, knowledge. Well, culture is a relationship we have with knowledge. So we have to understand the relationship of existing structures. So we have to understand the knowledge we've obtained and kind of understand our relationship with it and how we have maybe or have taken it ideology that is, white supremacist ideology or pro-capitalist ideology, which is white supremacy. And we have to also learn how things are inextricable from each other. So if we want to, I want to say like be better, but yes, be better. We have to understand how everything. I'm going on a tangent. I guess just re-educate ourselves essentially. So I think that's just very important. What we have to do. We have to challenge our prior beliefs and the relationship we have with it. I don't know if that makes sense, but educate yourself and think that there's a lot of things we learned that isn't really it's pseudo-intellectual. It's not real knowledge that we're consuming, and I think it's up to us because we're not going to be fed knowledge here under the imperial core. We're not going to be told the truth. So I think it's up to us as leftists, revolutionaries, whatever you want to call yourself. You want to be a leftist revolutionary, whatever you want to call yourself. Just learn. Educate yourself. Attend these things like you guys are here attending this. Speak to other leftists. Yeah. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Yeah. Thank you for letting me out on something. But just to add something on, I was thinking about it a little bit personally. And I think that, to speak from personal experience, it took me a long time to get to the point where I felt comfortable enough to enter space like CSIS and organize the CSIS. And thinking a lot about my youth, again, it's high school, but I'm like still, pretty much, oh my god, but thinking a lot about like my recent youth history. In high school, I was like always in the BS year, in the Black student union, not the Latino student union. And there was a very specific reason as to why, because I felt like when I entered the Latino student union, even though culturally I'm far more in touch with my Salvadoran heritage, I grew up with my Salvadoran family, and I just know a lot more about Salvadoran history than I do about anything else. There was that social disconnect of like, because I didn't look the same, and because the world's all up because I didn't look the same, that the struggle experience was different, that there wasn't a space for me to talk about my experiences and to come in, and it kind of felt like there was, like, not because there was an addition, right? And after that, when I think a better discussion we have is centering on Latina and centering it in Canada with Indigenous history. Because I feel like a lot of times when in progressive and then leftist Latino spaces, there could be, a very push to accept the indigeneity, but not the African identity, and not the Afro identity. And that's really frustrating, and I think that prevents us. Like we talked about this whole panel, that prevents us from being truly revolutionary, because when we separate it, we do that self-policing. So I think that's also something people can do, like, especially in leftist spaces, especially. At the same time, you do acknowledgments to your indigenous history, doing the same thing and making an effort to learn about African history, making an effort to make those connections, right? Like, what do you do every day or take in every day? Where does that come from, right? More often than not, it's going to come from African spirit and like making those bridges, right? I have a lot of African friends, and I find that I relate to them a lot more culturally than I do with my African American friends, just because of the fact that Latinidad is so much closer after than we think. So I think that's also something that people can do specifically in leftist spaces, taking the time to center out Latinidad, knowing the history of Latinidad, because that ultimately is your history, yeah, not to poke him out of, you didn't come out of a coconut tree, right? Like, you come from that history of African identity, of African history, African struggle. So, to not do that self-policing work of disassociating, disattaching yourself from it, like, and the African struggle. No, embracing that in some way and in a big way that is also your struggle. And so it's also your responsibility to run that too, because then you're not learning a bit of yourself, right? So, yeah.
great question. Thank you for that. An amazing answer too. I will only add that it sounds very liberal, it sounds very corporate, very HR. Like, listen, please, like come in and listen, like, but honestly, like, fucking listen. I have a homie who's the Panama, and we start talking. And I'm like, well, you got an accent. Like, what's going on? And like, guess where I'm from. I'm like, okay, of course, I got it wrong 5 times. So he tells me, so you're Panama. I'm like, oh, I never heard you speak Spanish. I'm like, yeah. He tells me, I don't speak Spanish around here. In my workplace. My workplace is half brown, half black. I just stay quiet because I hear what you guys talking about. I just stay quiet because it's not worth fighting on every single fucking thing. The only time he really speaks up is when a manager starts saying some shit in Spanish. And he goes, it's my favorite thing to do because they just turn fucking white. And they're already acting like mentally, right? I have, old college friends, Afro-Mexican, they grew up just with a Mexican family. Her Spanish is fucking phenomenal. She doesn't have like the forceful shit that I speak, right? She says, I'm in the bus, and I see some señoras, and they're looking at me, they're talking amongst themselves. Oh, cuídate, watch out. They said a lot more fucked up shit, right? She's like, I just wanted to speak up and say something in Spanish to check. I couldn't find the words, I couldn't speak. That's how they made me feel. So keep that in mind and share those stories and combat anti-blackness wherever you see it. It's a struggle because it feels like a struggle. It really isn't much to be a true ally. It's going to get awkward. Your homies or friends that still use the N-word. Oh, I don't mean it like that. Now I say with the A, it's different. Oh, well, I'm not white, so it's cool. I always remember George Lopez, like, trash that he is, had a joke about how brown families feel when you bring a black partner home. And there was like a big uproar about that joke. And I'm like, there's only an uproar about it because it's fucking true. You listen to all the fucking oldies you want. You can copy black culture, their style, and their language, because white people aren't the only culture vultures out here. The brown community has that. But it's fucking true. Bring home a black partner, and suddenly your whole family turns into conquistadors and shit. So just keep that in mind and combat it. And don't fucking let that shit slide. Because it's never unique. It's never just anti-black. But that's where it fucking starts. Because everybody feels safe talking shit and belittling black people.
I speak without mic. I just had a question to see if you guys have, or what would your opinions or advice be in regards to approaching the youth? Oftentimes, when we share communities with different races, the fights in schools, they happen, and then unavoidably, like, it starts to become a racial thing, even though it might not have been. So, how would you guys approach, the youth and conversating about these things and making sure, like, maybe we tone down the racism or make sure that that's not the perception that in the city, Mexicans are racist or the blacks are against the Mexicans and we escalate, right? Because I feel like this, sort of prison culture permeates with, big homies sometimes, and that's sort of the mentality that gets down in high school and middle school, So, what would you take on that? Thank you.
Yeah, I grew up in that experience. When Black Panther 2 came out, bro, my world was over. That whole movie, kind of putting against, Latinos and Black people against each other. I don't know what side of you are, like, my people can't, like, what's going on? But, yeah, I think it starts with, you have to be honest, right? There is that, and there's a reason for that, and a deep historical reason. Not even just like
racism historically, but also the history of Los Angeles, right? I think when I talked to my mom about her experience growing up in South LA as a Salvadoran immigrant, not Afro Salvadoran, but being Latina and clearly non-black, and she talks about the way as an immigrant she was treated by the other at the time South LA being majority black, still is today, but you see a lot more Latinos than there were back then. That informed, that's the history our parents grew up with, and that's the history that we come into, and that's the reason why at the high school those fights are going to be separated like that. And so I think it comes with first being honest and pointing out how the struggle, the thing you guys are fighting over, the root of that struggle, who enforces it, right? And who pushes it, and who wants that, and who benefits from that happening. I think so it starts with explaining that history, explaining and talking about where these racial tensions come from, acknowledging that, it comes from a history of African Americans, in the United States being frustrated that seemingly all of a sudden you get a lot of Latino immigrants coming to the United States, coming to Los Angeles, and now that these African American people aren't getting as many jobs, right? Because you have an influx of immigrants who are willing to do whatever work there is for how much it is, because of the status they have as new immigrants to the country. And then at the same time thinking about what does that lead to, looking at the Latino side, the xenophobia that we have to face for being immigrants and descendants of immigrants. And how it's frustrating, that comes from African Americans. And the racism also that the self-policing that comes from Latinos of I don't understand why how can I be discriminated against by this black person, right? They're supposed to be here, and so having those hard discussions and having those conversations about those talks, because on the same side, you have African Americans thinking that why is this immigrant, getting more benefits than I do, and explaining how those are the emotional lines of thinking that lead to these arguments, that lead to these fights, and then pointing out where do we unite in that, and how is our struggle a lot more similar than it is different. I think we're in Harvard University studying the decolonial movement of Africa. I was just wow, I'm so inspired, and I wish there was a push like that in Latin America. Because we are a lot more similar than we are different. And it takes going into those deep discussions and going into that conversation and explaining that history to the youth. And maybe not solve anything, maybe there will still be fights, maybe there will still be racial equality, because at the end of the day, based on color, people are gonna, make whole things. But I think that's to come from just outright saying those truths and saying those, what the feelings behind those things are, what the xenophobia and what the racism and what the colorism is behind it, and explain at the end of the day that benefits the white supremacist structure that's suppressing all of y'all and all of us. Because I think that's where the lack of understanding is. And so I wish I had had a teacher in school who would explain something like that, maybe, and I don't think there would have been less fights because people fight for whatever, but I think maybe there would have been more space for discussion of that, and maybe a safer space to explain that. And then acknowledge the fact that out of these connections, Latinos come from, and then even, before these connections, then we have Latinos exist, right? And that we're allowed to discuss that. But I think it comes from just being outright with the truth of why those things happen, who it benefits, and why it doesn't benefit you to continue to feed into that division and that separation. That's one part. And I think also, what's crazy about it too is that when you talk to, the other black kids at school, they're finding out that wait a minute, at home your grandmother's from Belize, so, and then your grandfather is from Panama, Honduras, so then, you're actually also Latinx, but they don't think of themselves like that, right? And then, so having those discussions too, and talking about truly what that means, and that is beyond, flags and nations. So I think that could be also an addition, because I feel like a lot more people act Latino than they know. And that's sad, and I wish more people knew they're Latino, but there's a reason for that, right? There's a reason to
maybe that could be like for high school student, and maybe I'm wrong. Thank you for your question. I like this one. Different contexts. I would say, or in order to mitigate that, I think it's important to teach the kids, I guess, within your job, getting in trouble with your job, whatever it is you do, what your enemy is, whether it be the police, the state, politicians, it's not going to be your black classmate, it's not going to be, your Latino, Afro-Latino, immigrant student. That is, your enemy. We know these stereotypes, we learn these stereotypes, because of the systems that are in place, and we see, for example, a lot of black people institutionalized in jail because of carceral laws, right? And we're taught, oh, they're in jail because whatever, such and such stereotype. Or we see a lot of immigrants here, Latinos, they're here because of state capitalist relations in their other home country. They come here because the real enemy, the U.S. It's not going to be your neighbor. It's not going to be, the little ghetto, or I don't know. Those in power are the ones that are the real enemy. It's not your classmate. And I think that's what I've done when working with youth, is essentially teaching them who the real enemy is. I think it's just within the context that you're teaching. I know there's you get in trouble, and this is more I don't know, it's like logistics, but just being careful with the way you word it, because I've gotten in trouble before. You're teaching to get something, go about it a certain way, so you can keep your job and not lose it. So yeah, that's how I guess radicalize the youth, is through, hey, I see this is the real problem. Your enemy is the reason things are the way they are. So I guess some sort of radicalization can start at any age. I think it's like a misconception. I think probably because of the subjugation of youth here, we think that people, they can't learn, but you can learn at any age, and I think it's important that they don't. You can teach them at any age. So yeah, that's what I would address it.
Okay. I guess I'm kind of ageist, to be honest. Because there's a difference between an elder and an old person. Usually old people are the ones that continue to, perpetrate that legacy of anti-blackness specifically here. Especially also those old fools, those veteranos ass fools that are fucking unbearable to me. Those, you speak Spanish to them, they get angry at you type shit. Right? So I don't fuck with them in general. But the youth, they do. They do because they see them as figures that they want to imitate. Another thing too. So when we talk about that racial fight among blacks and brown people, I'm kind of, from my limited understanding of Afro-pessimism, I kind of support it. I kind of support it because, we've been speaking about all through Latin America, brown people always scapegoat black people, right? So for me, it's I understand the black community saying, we don't fuck with y'all, because every time we get together, you guys fuck us over. That's the truth. Every time we get together, we sell them out in order to align closer to whiteness. So why the fuck would they trust us? That's just the honest truth about it. Historically, look at the records there. Always get left behind. So dealing with that harsh reality is, I think, the first step. Making young people realize that, yeah, you might be brown, but you still have privileged benefits, although you're black passing. they're not using your racial slurs. They're not calling anybody like that. And yet you're over here using the N-word left and right. Why is that? Let's talk about that. Why do you feel so comfortable co-opting their culture and embracing that white supremacist mindset? If God forbid somebody calls you a leader, because then there's going to be an issue. The hypocrisy is something that we need to acknowledge and address. There's this article that I read in preparation for this. How do you celebrate your Latin Unidad? And it was an article and a lot of like, black radical feminists, contributed to the article. And they were saying we don't, because Latinidad does not celebrate us. Again, going back to that separation of the Caribbean and Latin America, trying to pretend that black people don't exist, and there's no such thing as a black Latino. Right? So, it's not going to be easy, but a lot of it does have to deal with, again, the anti-blackness in the brown community. Because that is every brown community, Mexican, Honduran, wherever. Anti-blackness is existing. When we talk about xenophobia in the black community, it's very starting to grow. As we see the collapse of the empire. But that's something relatively new compared to centuries of anti-blackness in brown communities. So a lot of it is being honest with ourselves and how we contribute to upholding white supremacy and oppressing black people. Because it's not equal fucking, it's not equal. It really isn't. And to pretend or to tell children that it is, it's not like bullshit going on is all get along. But I don't know.
My question more, thank you for the I gravitate towards youth more often than not. But as a person that did attend a school here, Kingston Medical Beckett, so I'm very familiar with the area and the energies that lie within, it be coming from the medical system, it be from the community, from the environmental injustices that happen, right? That unfortunately impact our youth. But with that said, what I'm finding is that there is a proactive group of educators that are actively engaging amongst themselves, and I'm talking about straight up white educators, right, in LAUSD, as we speak, that are organizing themselves in such a way that, I'm not sure if you've heard of ethnic studies, and I'm sure, yeah, in such a way that our youth will get exposed, to those gifts that they naturally have, right? That comes from the country. So I'm being very real right now in that I think at this point in time, we need to show up for our youth in a very militant fashion. And I'm saying education, right? Showing up for our youth, full stop. Like we could talk about change in the home, most definitely, right? Check your nephew. In my case, I have nephews, right? Check your nephew if they say something. Most definitely. Invite them to these spaces. Most definitely, right? But I think that we have a huge responsibility right now. It's not only amongst ourselves as adults here, but I think more often than not we forget about our youth. And the thing is, they're growing up, and it never ends. So I think that my question for you is, how do you suggest moving
Thank you for that, and no disrespect, this isn't some academic space where you only have to answer a question in like 3 minutes or less. Like, I appreciate the fact that you shared, your experience and frustration, because it's fucking real, and this is what Midnight Post is all about. That's why we have this space. This is why we're grateful for Gabe, because we're not fucking experts here. We're telling you the little bit that we know, but y'all know your shit too. And we're grateful for you being here and showing up. And yes, please share your experience. It doesn't just have to be standard Q&A. So thank you for that, and anybody else. And it's not necessarily a question you're asking. Let that shit out too. Like, if you're just frustrated, if you're upset, let it be known. This is what this space is for. Thanks to Gabe and Midnight Post for that. Just briefly, Kwame Ture said it. We're all organized. We're all organized. When you reread Malcolm X, I mean, it's so sad how relevant everything it says still is. But yeah, we fucked up the moment that we allowed white people to educate our children. Oh, we got ethnic studies finally. Oh my goodness, finally. Like, what do you mean finally? Why the fuck were we asking for permission? So a lot of it becomes, you see this movement with the evangelical far right of embracing homeschooling, teaching them the earth is flat, teaching them that, we live alongside dinosaurs and even animal dinosaurs, that type of shit. They're organized. They're pushing that forward. They're fucking organized. So we're failing the next generation. Why are we organizing? They won't allow us, to be honest, the state won't allow us to embrace homeschooling the way that white people are allowed to. Okay, after school program. Let's do it. It's on us. Accountability, responsibility, it's on us. We know better. We don't have the excuse of ignorance. Let's fucking do it.
So I strongly agree with everyone does. We're not gonna, these kids are not gonna learn, they're not gonna be radicalized in the institutions, public schools, private schools, universities, how radical they present themselves at. So I agree. It's up to the organizers, it's up to us, community organizing. I know there's organizations here that hosted, there's like that, church meeting with the Stella Youth. What was there's organizations here, and I think it's very important to get these kids into spaces like that, because you're not going to learn this in their LAU. Even as radical as an educator you want to be, you still have limitations, and still you can individually, as an educator, you can radicalize kids, but it's not through the institution. It's not institutionalized. We have to help these kids find a space where they can be educated, a space of expression, of self-expression, because you're not going to find that in, these schools. And I think that's important. And I think it also depends on where you work with you. Like if you're an educator, a school district, I think individually all of them, but I think in the end, you have to organize with the community and create these spaces with them, and not lead them, but let them create their own space and shape their own space. Because I think a lot of people don't really trust youth, a lot of them trust kids, but I think they have more knowledge than we give them credit for. So youth are very radical, because they challenge things, they see things that are so hard, institutionalized, and they're like, wow, it's quite happening. So I don't know if you guys have worked with kids, you see this questioning, schools want kids to be quiet and follow certain rules, certain ways, and I think it's up to us to give them that space and, organize as a community in order to further radicalize them and let them further express themselves. These are very important and can't leave them behind in this struggle.
Ask something really quickly so I can get space and hopefully ask her question. But I think I was not radicalized in school. If anything, school practical limit my radicalization.
But I think the greatest allies when I was doing things like organizing walkouts at school or trying to get like political organizations to come back to the campus, my greatest allies were the teachers who made space for that. Who were like, I'll keep you in my classroom after school, I'll stay late after school to let you do this. I'll let you post flyers, you know. I won't tell the administration who's going to stop you from doing whatever you're doing. I'll give you more guidance to do something in a safer way. You know, if you want kids to get off my campus, here's how to do it, probably in a way where kids aren't going to get hit by a cop or something like that. So, yeah, everything the comments, the camaraderie in general, and just being that, like the company says, students will do it, or because they're smart and they want to do it themselves. And then I think the greatest ally for a kid who wants to do it themselves is being that interesting for them and doing the little work that it takes, whether it is learning oral, learning literature, printing things out, letting their classroom, small things like that. But yeah, just to reemphasize the goals of that.
Hi everyone, my name is Priscilla Luna. Thank you so much for providing this space. This is amazing. For anyone interested in homeschooling, I've been homeschooling for 10 years here in LA. And there are a lot of Black and brown communities that we've built within LA. So if you guys are interested in learning about homeschooling, I can tell you guys how to do it. Because you're right, a lot of the white people, Christians specifically, you know, they start, our children's brains, the way it works is from birth, right? We're teaching them how to see the world. It covers everything. So what we've done is because, you know, white supremacy is the center of schooling, everything they learn is about colonizers and all of that. So I studied child development at Cal State Northridge. I worked in the school systems for 5 years, and I was like, when I had my own kids, like, hell no, I'm not going to put them in this school. And it's a lot. I mean, we're slowly getting there, but if you're interested, talk to me, and I'll tell you a little bit more details. I mean, we can even have maybe a whole session on homeschooling. And then a lot of it is building, it's about building community, right? So as we build a family, you know, we need to all work together as a community. And definitely teaching your children at a young age, but also, unfortunately, a lot of people don't have access to homeschooling. It's not, you know, you have to work, right? But we have groups in Escondido, we have groups in Long Beach, we have several groups within our community, and you don't have to be rich necessarily to be able to homeschool. You can leave your kids with a abuela, and then Dia takes care of this, you know, child while we're working. And I mean, we have unhoused community, unhoused people in our homeschooling community. We have single moms, you know, all of that. So a lot of it is like we really have to step outside the box and say like this is not possible. But you know, how can we work together as a community? Because definitely our youth is where, you know, right now what we're trying to do when we work as adults, we're trying to unprogram each other, right? And like unlearn, and so that we can be open to new possibilities, a new world. But if you can start that at a very young age and build communities with our children and teach them about anti-Blackness, about, you know, capitalism, about all those things, like it really is, investing in our youth is really important. And so we've done that within our, you know, our family, and our, you know, kids have been able to avoid a lot. But I also understand it's not always possible unless you have a community of people. But if you guys want to know more about homeschooling, I can tell you specifically how we can do that in California, because it is possible. We just have to work together.
Thank you.
I speak really low sometimes, but I was gonna say, sorry. Thank you, sorry, I speak low. But I was gonna say, going off of what you said, we actually have a youth network, it's called Sign On, and I can give y'all a QR code. We work with youth in trying to like visualize a better Stella. So even if you are like, the age range is from 12 to 26, and if you guys are interested, I can pass out like it takes one person to radicalize, or it just takes one person to like give you the opportunity to see the world differently. So yeah, basically, I don't really have time for another question. I actually have one, but I don't know if there's time.
Yeah, we'll take your question and then yours.
I'm just gonna piggyback off of Priscilla. I'm a journalist, and I wrote a report for LA Taco about these two public educators who passed, I don't know if anyone was familiar with liberated studies. They were sued by the Zionist lobby for including Palestine and Arabic studies into our program. And when they got sued, they made it out to the public. So if you're interested in learning more about it, you Google liberated studies. They put the curriculum on there for anyone who can access it.
Thank you.
My question is, basically, I want to talk a lot, and unfortunately, I have a really strong resurgence of racism. I feel like a lot of educators have also seen that as well. And basically, my question is not only the study, but do you believe the resurgence of racism in this day has anything to do with the economic collapse and recession that we're experiencing? Before that question, also talking about education kids, how can you make your lessons spaces more kid friendly? I think is also something about that. I think some ways I would radicalize when my mom is turning me on to her usually meetings, right? And then be listening. But also, encouraging that more. And then like the adults are gonna be talking to someone, there should be someone also talking to the kids in the other room. Yeah, so there's that. But then to answer your question, the resurgence of racism, absolutely. Oh my gosh, the resurgence of racism, the resurgence of misogyny, also that we're seeing 100% has to do. I think I'm not an economist. I can't even pronounce that word. I'm not an economist, so I can tell you, oh, this goes good. But I definitely think the two are related. And this whole like weird TikTok movement we're seeing, people embracing traditional like trad life, trad living culture 100%, is definitely high. I think to economic depression, and even like just I joke with my friends a lot, like, oh my god, we see like a McDonald's is like not that we go to McDonald's, but we thought. But like something's like more expensive now, we're like, oh my god, Biden's America, haha. But people actually, buy into that and they think that. So I think, yeah, they're definitely related. I don't know, it's a feeling. I think they are. I think, it's clear maybe those mentioned, but maybe people bring it up to speak to specifically how I'm excited. I like your question too. It was more of a statement. I mean, it wasn't a statement, but it was a yes or no. You know the answer. So I don't know. That's one of the things with here. So this would like probably be like more of a last rush attempt to mitigate the apparatus. So like I mentioned, we were talking about how everything exists with one another, so like race, gender does not exist outside of capitalism. So we see this last rush attempt to maintain the apparatus. So these people are trying really hard in order to grasp onto capitalism, and we see how it's like going right now with accelerating really fast. We see these efforts of maintaining the apparatus and other outlets that support capitalism, so like racism, misogyny, colorism, and I would argue homophobia isms. So we see those things being, there's no fear, right? But we see them like more in your face because these, again, I was like see them or characterize them as like a last attempt in order to maintain the current economic structure of capitalism. So that's what I think.
Yeah, y'all see this whole like white guys for Harris, white women for Harris? It's a beautiful thing to watch. But a lot of these white women were complaining that, like, I lost my father to Donald Trump and the MAGA movement. He was such a sweet guy, he's like doing on conspiracy theorists, he's hateful, this and that. Nah, like if Donald Trump was the one, a major white supremacist, or comfortable openly being one, you always were. And so in a lot of ways,
think it's beneficial. I like my enemies up front. I like to know who hates me, who I need to go to war with. That's why I think, liberals are conniving and unsettling. You hear, when Kamala was in Atlanta, and all these people clapping for how she's saying, unlike Trump, I am going to go hard on the border. And all these lunatics are just raving, happy about it. So, yeah, we're going to start seeing more open racism as everything starts collapsing and it gets more and more, the contradictions arise. But the one thing I will say is, like, if you can afford it, buy a gun. I'm pro-gun. The liberals have, defanged the leftist movements who think that guns are scary or whatever the fuck. Go out to the shooting range and can't, it's expensive. I can't afford to do it enough. Better arm yourself. It's not like some post-apocalyptic Mad Max shit that we're gonna shoot out or whatever. But they got them. Social week, and the safety, community preservation. So kind of embracing the realities that when several colonial projects collapse, they cannibalize themselves. We're going to see the modernization of the United States, sure. But people assume like California is like liberal safe haven. Go down to Orange County. Go down to fucking Orange County. I've come to Nazi figures myself. I mean, we have big regions that are like historically sundown towns in Southern California. Yeah, you're not even talking about it. Exactly, like it's real everywhere. So let's just be honest with the reality of as shit collapses, it's gonna get worse, it's gonna get more frightening. And to be honest with ourselves, we're not prepared. We're not prepared, we're not ready. When they stop pretending that we're all little revolutionaries and we're ready to take the fucking streets. Respectfully, you even have one of the cops, because, not to be able to, but we don't even embrace fucking fitness because we automatically think it's like a fascist thing. You gotta be ready to scrap. You gotta be able to defend yourself and the people that you love.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Y'all make sure to stick around. The next panel will start in a few minutes.
Yeah.